He wanted extras in all these venues. He didn't want tiling, where you take a group of extras and you multiply them out with visual effects. He wanted to fill these venues. So suddenly we're in De Anza College area where they actually launched the Macintosh in '84. We went back to the same venue and recreated that product launch. But now I have to fill that auditorium with 1,800 people.
Hi, and welcome back to StudioBinder Academy. I'm Brandon. Today we're speaking with Second Assistant Director Pete Dress, whose previous work includes Gran Torino, Steve Jobs, Passengers, the Bikeriders, and many more. Pete, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
We're excited as well. I mean, your body of work, not a lot of people can hold a candle to that.
I don't know if my blushing is showing up on camera, but here we go.
Well, if I had your body of work, I would be blushing as well. So, jumping into it, what drew you into filmmaking?
I had a collateral interest in film and, the ability to escape in the dark since I was a kid. I finished high school. I went into the Navy, so there was a bit of a detour, but I didn't lose that interest. We were making these really bad horror movies on my ship all through my time in the Navy. And then as I got close to getting out, I sort of timed it so I could take some leave at the end of my time and start the fall semester at San Diego State because I was down there stationed anyway. And then I went to film school, moved to LA, and sort of the rest is history.
Okay. And is there anything specifically that kind of drew you towards the directing route?
I think as an assistant director, you straddle the line between backing up a director with his or her vision in the creative side, but you're also the on-site manager, if you will. And I know you've covered the aspects of what a first AD does, and I'm sure we're going to get into that. Mm-hmm. But you're sort of this entity that does both. I'm not in a department that would just relegate me, although every department to some degree does both as well. But I think as the assistant director, you're on the directorial team, but you're also the company manager, if you will. So it's this really cool dynamic where those two worlds come together. And I think that's kind of how my brain is wired anyway. So it was sort of like a natural fit.
That makes sense. Definitely makes sense. Yeah, I've done some AD work in my past as well. And those characteristics you talk about, it's when you sit down and really think about it, there are certain characteristics of, you look at directors, they share similar qualities. Are there specific qualities that you would say kind of lend themselves to being an AD?
I think the ability to sort of like manipulate objects in 3D space, if that makes sense. You're able to stay in the present, but you time travel a lot, and that this is going to happen in the future if I don't come back now and stop it from happening. You see something like a trash truck up the block, something as simple as that, or something more complex like this site is going to be under construction, so we would need to move the company there now. But even within that, they might already have started, and then there's noise. So it's always kind of like a rotating puzzle. And I think if your brain is if you can handle multiple data streams and manipulate the data and then come out with a solution on the fly often, I think you'd be a pretty good fit. It can be daunting if you're not inclined to already problem solve, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. That definitely makes sense. Yeah, I've found like being able to multitask is a huge asset.
For sure.
Definitely. Now, if I'm correct, you came up through the DGA trainee program. Is that correct?
I did, yes. And just to sort of circle back, when I got out of San Diego State Film School, I came to LA. I was PAing on these really low budget, straight to video things. And then I got into the trainee program, which sort of is a streamlined pathway that gets you into the Directors Guild as an AD.
Okay. And what's that experience like?
In the days of yore, they would do a written exam. They don't do the written part anymore, but it was sort of like this massive test. And they would always do it on Super Bowl Sunday. And I always thought that was like the first subconscious cut, because you have to make your choice. Am I going to watch the game, or am I going to go to USC and sit in a classroom? So I don't know how many applied the year I got in, but they took 22 of us out of X amount. It's not a very high percentage, and I believe
Mm.
that maybe 15 of us got through,
Oh
and we
wow.
all still work. So it's a little daunting in that the cut is pretty steep, and then as you go along, you're oftentimes being integrated into AD teams that already exist, and you're sort of like the new guy or the new gal. So you have to figure out pretty quickly this team already has a shorthand and they know what makes each other tick. So you sort of have to integrate fairly quickly so that you become part of that team, and maybe one of them moves up or moves on. Then when you're done with your training, you might be able to slide in. And that's kind of how I got in with the Coen brothers.
Hmm.
Was the trainee on a movie with them, and their team brought me along after I graduated.
Oh, okay. Okay, excellent. Thank you. Now, speaking of the AD teams, for those that might not know, could you explain the differences between a first AD and a second AD?
Sure. Typically, the first AD, at its core level, they would break down the script. They would put it into a form that then gets distributed each shooting day. And generally, that gets massaged against what the budget is. There's often times where the number of shooting days would exceed the budget. So either a rewrite's in order, or sometimes you could get some days to the schedule. That's rare. Um, and then day to day, they would run the set. They would call the rolls and cuts. They're responsible for keeping everything on any given day on track as far as managing the shooting unit. All of that would happen under the purvey of the first. Then what the second AD does is I prep with the first, and I don't necessarily get as much pre-production, but when I'm there in pre-production, I sit in on the meetings and I know what they know, so that when we're underway, I know all of the critical thinking that was driving a specific day. So while they're running the set, I'm sort of making sure that tomorrow the snake wrangler is there with the snake, or this actor that flew in from New York, I know that they've landed successfully in LA or wherever we are. And I sort of get all the elements lined up so that they're there on the day to then give to the first, if you will, who's running the set. So I'm sort of like the hub where all of the elements come through me to make sure that they're prepped and ready to go to be filmed on any given day.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, yeah, and it seems that they would both go hand in hand. Is there for you? Is there an ideal collaborative process between you, the second AD, and the first AD?
I think the more prep I get, the more I can back him or her up. What I try to do as the second, because when you're running the set, especially if there's stunts or
Hmm.
complicated VFX rigs where you have to put people on a crane in front of a, the more complicated the day on set is, the less I'm going to have time to go, hey, first AD, hey, first AD, hey, first AD, question, question. So what I try to do is the more meetings I've been on in prep, I already
Mhm.
know the answer to any questions I might have. So what I'll do is I think the collaboration comes from us having a really strong prep period together. And
Mhm.
also the first ADs I work with, we kind of have a shorthand, and I know where to fill in the holes. I know that I should do this with this first or not do that with this first. So I think the
Gotcha.
collaboration is I try to think like the first and the director so that I can keep things moving without having to constantly interrupt the flow of what's happening on set. Inevitably, you'll have questions that you can't
Mhm.
answer because something may have happened on that day that affects what you prepped. So generally, lunchtime is sort of like the sacred interval when first ADs and second ADs around the world have that 15-minute chat about the next day. And generally, I'll try to save all of my onslaught of questions for lunch if we even break, and then if not, I'll have
Gotcha.
to figure
Okay.
out how to get those answered.
Okay. All right. And the prep that you mentioned, what for you, what does that entail?
Well, we just did a film with Jeff Nichols. We did the Bikeriders, and in that
Mhm.
specific case, we had to have these actors on motorcycles without helmets and goggles. I mean, it was underwritten, and we were able to do it safely so that we could sell the period in the '60s. So, an inordinate amount of my prep on Bikeriders was sort of like boot camp for bikes.
Oh,
All
okay.
these actors had motorcycle licenses already, but we put them into the formation that they would ride for the movie, and then we would filter in the stunt guys behind them, and then we would filter in the extras that also had period bikes behind them, and we would ride the pack. So in that case, it was a heavy lift to get everybody ready so that when we filmed them as a group ride, they had already done it in prep. I mean, that's just one specific example. Every movie is different on what we do, but the overwhelming amount of prep, if it's a sort of like a period piece, it would be fittings and things like that. Or in the case of the Bikeriders, it was motorcycle riding and training. And it would just depend on the film. It would be to try to do as much as we can before we roll sound, that everything we're going to photograph is as prepped as possible. So every film is different.
Okay. Yeah, it makes sense that it would be guided by what is in the actual script. So yeah, that totally makes sense. Thank you. Thank you. Now, as far as your responsibilities during production, could you touch on that?
Sure. So an average day for me would be, I would usually start off the day by getting the talent, into the hair and makeup process. I'll have an assistant with me, and then I'll sort of supervise that process. And then I would take any questions like day of. Uh, Somebody will say, "Oh, where were we supposed to do this? Where is this?" And a lot of times we'll get into call sheets, but a lot of times uh, the call sheet is a guide, but there is a lot more detailed information that we've talked about that I couldn't put on a call sheet. And then I'll just remind people, oh, yeah, we're going to do this and this and this. So on any given day, my responsibility would be the centralized sort of communication hub with the filming set. The production office kind of runs in the background, and they would be handling like contracts and incoming things like that. But I would be managing the talent that's already been cast, it's already been papered. I would be handling that. And then any elements, like sometimes we have a specialized piece of camera gear, or an arm car or a drone crew. I would facilitate getting them to where they need to be, because generally they got their information from me, their call time. So I'm the number they have, and I would sort of guide them too. So
Okay.
regardless of the show, on any given day, I'm sort of like the communication hub.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. Thank you for that. All right. Now you mentioned call sheets. I'm sure at one point or another we've all received one. But from a working AD, could you tell us what your definition of the purpose of a call sheet is?
I think it would give everybody a baseline idea of what the day holds, and at a glance you would know the script day for costume changes. You would know what we're shooting. You would know where we're shooting it. You would know any elements. Is someone getting served with a subpoena? Props would have the subpoena. Whatever it is, at a glance, it gives you all that information. And then it also gives you a glimpse into the future, because generally at the bottom would be an advanced schedule of 1 or 2 days, depending on how much space there is. So you'd have a glance into the future as to what's coming. And a lot of times in the advance, if it's something important, like the birthday cake, we need 10 of those because someone's going to get their face in it. I'll just highlight it for props to look at the advance. Now, they have done their own breakdown. I don't
Mhm.
expect anybody to be on the day with my call sheet saying, "Oh dear, I don't have the wedding dress," because then I haven't done my job in advance of making sure that the final dress fitting has happened. So I think the call sheet gives you generalized broad strokes that in a perfect day, we're going to do this. Somebody, in days of not too far ago, somebody tested positive for COVID. Then the call sheet is completely NA. We'll then go
Mhm.
into the schedule and try to pull things up. But I think it gives you what our best case and our perfect plan would be on a random Tuesday, would be what's on the call sheet.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. Yeah. So it's essentially gives you everything you need to know for that day of work. Um,
Correct.
yes. So thank you for that. Thank you. Now, when it comes to creating a call sheet, do you have a general process that you have whenever creating a call sheet?
I do. Some of it is just raw data entry, and you would take
Hmm.
that off from some other production schedules that have been generated, and that comes from the first AD's breakdown of the script. So some of it would be where where the set is, interior Jill's house. Jill gets a phone call that her mother is sick. Whatever the scene is, all of that data is basically data entry from a schedule. If the day is complicated, like we're going to start here, do a magic hour scene, and then push move here for the bulk of the night's work, a lot of that is not on a schedule. It is in terms of exterior set number one, exterior set number two, but there's a whole lot of critical thinking, like where are the trucks going to be? Do I need all the trucks for the magic hour shot? Probably not. Maybe camera, you know. And then I start putting notes on there. These trucks are at location one. These trucks are at location two. That's where the real meat of it comes in. So my general process would be data entry with all of the day's slug lines and who's in it, etc., the advanced schedule. And once that's done, if it's a complicated day, I'll start then going in there saying, we have a drone working. Here's a safety bulletin, this and this and this and this. So it's generally the data entry is the easy part. And then I start doing the more critical thinking part of it.
Okay. All right. Now, beyond that, are there any tips for someone that might be creating their first call sheet that you could give them?
I use a lot of text bubbles. I'll do a lot of notes in pink or green or orange, and I'll put them kind of randomly so that the field of a call sheet is generally white with black text. But then all these bubbles, whether extras are parking here, that's important for extras casting, or the drone crew reports here, or I use a lot of bubbled boxes so at a glance somebody can see what's going on. And when COVID happened, a lot of people, we didn't do paper call sheets. So on your iPad, all those bubbles show up pretty clearly because it's a color screen. So I think the more, you don't want to overwhelm people, because a lot of that, I personally don't think you could convey the complexity of some of these days, especially if you have like 2 company moves, which is, already tricky. You would have already talked to the best boys and the camera assistants. And, I would say put notes and put the critical thinking out there, but also back it up with conversations so that they have that to fall back on in their memory besides just your note.
Excellent. Yeah. So annotations, just be very clear, but don't overwhelm. Correct?
Correct.
All right. Excellent. As far as any other paperwork, are there any other forms or anything, contracts that you're responsible for on set?
So what'll happen normally is when an actor his deal is made, a lot of times the contracts will come out from the office and they'll be marked to the second AD, or if we have another AD in base camp, there's another tier of AD as well on our team. So we would make sure that the actors sign their contracts, for example. I would also, if the schedule has changed, the first AD has done some modifications to the production schedule, I will send the revised schedules to the actors as well so that they know what lines or what scenes are coming up in their work as well. And those are primarily what I would do. And also any off production people, like a specialized, like a drone crew or anything like that, I would get them the call sheet in the map as well. But that sort of falls under, the call sheet distribution as it is.
Okay.
And then also, depending on the show, if the set is quite busy, and let's say we have a couple of late arriving extras because they're specialty extras later in the day, if I'm in base camp, a lot of times I'll just check them in. So I would do like the extras vouchers. If there's a bunch of them, then I'll pull an AD back to help out. But sometimes I'll do that depending on how the day is going on the set.
Now, as far as creating a call sheet, are there any mistakes, common mistakes that either you've experienced or you've seen people make when creating a call sheet that you might be able to help them out with?
I think sometimes when you do it, it's easy, like it's a small thing, but the page counts, so I have a formula that sums up how many pages are on the day, because if it's 5 3/8 and your formula was wrong and you have like 1 1/4, but the backup on that is you have the strips, and if one of them is a big divorce scene in the kitchen, you already knew that was a big scene. So yes, it's a math error. I think that's an easy one. Sometimes getting the interior and exterior flip-flopped because you're in a hurry typing, it might be interior Jill's house and you're actually exterior. I've actually done that a couple times, but the cinematographer is like, hey, this is actually outside. I'm like, oh, thank
Oh,
goodness,
really?
dude, because you don't want to be setting up the cameras in the kitchen if you're supposed to be,
Hmm.
outside the house. So little things like that. I have not left an actor off entirely, where you completely, because you have
Hmm.
the cast delineated in the strip, like cast numbers 1, 9,
Hmm.
12, 13, and then down below. But I have heard stories of where 13 didn't make it on there, but the second AD caught it later and was able to call him and bring him into work. Um, and obviously the typos, the spelling errors, but I don't
Hmm.
really, I'm not going to say that I don't care, but a typo versus a lot of critical thinking, I think I can forego that. You know what I mean? If I left a T
Absolutely.
off of attendant, where I think we're going to be okay as a company.
Yeah, yeah. They get the general
So
idea of what.
yeah, so I don't
Yeah.
want to demean all the second ads out there that are like hardcore spell checkers, but I think the overwhelming purpose of that is the critical thinking behind any given shoot day, and that's where you come in as the second.
Gotcha. Absolutely. Yeah. So just pay attention to the details. I
Yeah,
found that in my own work. Like you said, misspellings. Those everyone does those, but missing a person, that's that's a whole nother deal.
yeah.
Now, as far as call sheets for film and TV, are there any stark differences between the two?
I would say page count, but that's just a function of the medium, one versus the other. But as far as the template, no, I've done a few episodic shows and I just use the same template.
Okay.
Um, so they're sort of easy to go back and forth.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. Now you said you're essentially the hub when you're on set. Do you have Do you find that you face any challenges when trying to coordinate talent and crew?
It's scale specific because
Hmm.
some shows you didn't get all the questions answered in prep, and some of those unanswered questions will then impact incoming elements or incoming cast members. And then you have the cast members rightfully wanting to know what their first day of shooting will be, in terms
Hmm.
of the work. But for example, several other unanswered questions have decided where that work is going to occur. Maybe we're still waiting on a very site specific location, Pasadena City Hall or whatever. So we don't have that section quite figured out yet. So a lot of times it's literally you just fly by the seat of your pants, and I'll give out the information that I know with a bunch of caveats that we're not 100% dialed in yet. That is probably the most challenging thing, I think, is if that you're not fully prepped because of circumstances beyond the company's control. It's not like we were
Mm.
out partying during prep. It's just that there were a lot of unanswered questions that followed us into production. And then because you also have to prep any given shoot day. So I have to focus on the next day or the next 2 days, while at the same time, next Tuesday, I've got somebody, a high profile actor or something, and I still don't have all the answers for him or her. So it's sort of like the time travel. I have to go into the future to protect us so we don't hit the iceberg, but I also have to get tomorrow dialed in. So you constantly sort of move back and forth in time. And that's probably for me as a second, that's the most tiring thing is you constantly
Mm.
time travel. I
Oh,
always look to
okay.
the horizon. This is due on this date, but this is due before that, and this is due tomorrow. But tomorrow, because this is due tomorrow, if tomorrow rains out, for example, then I have to
Hmm.
start prepping this for next Tuesday, but I still don't even know what Tuesday was going to be, and it's a constant traveling back and forth temporally to make sense of all of it.
That
I
makes
know I'm
sense.
selling the job really strong here. everybody line up to be a second AD.
Now, I would imagine being on a big budget film versus a low budget film, there are different challenges in coordinating and being a second AD, beyond just the cast size and the elements and required and everything. Are there specifics that you can tell us between a big budget and low budget film being a second AD?
I think on the bigger budget films, the ones that I've done have had a lot more corresponding level of practical effects
Hmm.
and stunts and things like that. So that's a whole other complication because all of those things as scripted require prep as well. And oftentimes that prep can't happen in the prep period. So you'll prep as you go by design, like you need a gimbal for a plane crash or whatever it is, or I have to get all these soldiers ready to have a firefight outside of a building. I'm not going to do that 2 months out in prep. I'm going to do that as we get closer. But you have to juggle that and make that safe and all the specifics of that sequence. This set piece has to be prepped in addition to rolling along as you go. So the bigger ones I've done have been trickier in that they had specific set pieces that were big enough to require weeks of prep while we were already underway because we couldn't do it 2.5, 3 months out. So that becomes a lot trickier that sometimes I'll leave the base camp if that prep is going on somewhere else just to make sure it's underway safely and properly. And then I'll leave an AD there and then go back to the base camp. That's when I really start getting spread, is when things like that start to go down on a show of a larger size, if that makes sense.
That definitely makes sense. Now, as far as interactions with the other departments while on set or even in prep, what are those interactions usually like?
There's sort of like a boilerplate template that we'll follow during prep. It's like we'll have a costumes meeting, we'll have a props meeting, we'll have a special effects meeting, sometimes special effects and stunts together, depending on what it is. When we did King Richard, we had a lot of meetings about tennis, getting our young ladies prepped to be, Serena and Venus. So every boilerplate template will expand or contract depending. Again, they're all kind of project specific.
Mhm.
But what we'll do is we will allot time to every department. Even if it's not a period movie, we'll still have a costumes meeting because they'll have questions for the director. And they'll want to show him their ideas. So we'll set meetings for every single, department as we go along in prep. And then once you're underway, I've done a couple of football movies and we did King Richard. Those departmental meetings start narrowing down to uniforms because we had a bunch of NFL teams that were playing. Got to make sure we have the uniforms lined up and things like that. So there's sort of like the broad prep. And then as you get closer and closer, it starts to get more departmental specific because something is coming that really affects more one department than the whole company as a whole.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I get that. All right. Now, you've worked on both the first team and the second team. For those of us who don't know, could you explain the difference between those two, the first and second team?
Sure, the first team would be your cast members, and also a lot of times your stunt players will get under that umbrella too. If you have a lot of stunt people, sometimes I will bring on another person just to wrangle them so that my primary person that's wrangling cast can focus on the cast. So those two together would be what we call first team. Bring in first team, ready for first team. Where is first team? Every time you
Mhm.
hear that phrase, it's primarily speaking of the principal cast and stunt performers. Second team would be the stand-ins that are being utilized for the cinematographer to light and the director sometimes to block with while first team is off the set. So what you'll do is you'll finish a scene, for example, and then as you move on to the next scene, you'll rehearse with first team. They'll step off. Second team comes in, and they're what the cinematographer uses to light while the actors are either back at their trailer or in their cast chairs or grabbing a smoke or snack or whatever. So that's the primary delineation. Would be the stand-ins or second team, principal, and stunts would be first team.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And as a second AD, do you interact with the extras or background, which I would assume would be the second unit?
That's case specific too. What
Mhm.
we'll normally have on our team is we'll have in the UK and abroad they're called third ADs. Here in the States we call it a second AD, and
Okay.
he or she would primarily handle the management of the extras on the set. They will set them. They will make sure that they clear the set when they're ready to move on to a new scene. They'll put them back in their holding area. The second does that. But I did a film up in San Francisco with Danny Boyle. Oh, Steve Jobs, and that was a dramatically different take for me because Danny wanted he wanted extras in all these venues. He didn't want tiling, where you take a group of
Mm-hmm.
extras and you multiply them out with visual effects. He wanted to fill these venues. So suddenly we're in De Anza College in uh, up in the Bay Area where they actually launched the Macintosh in '84. We went back to the same venue and recreated that product launch. But now I have to fill that auditorium with, we try to get 1,800 people, and I think we were a little above that. There are actually specialty groups that will get you big crowds with raffles and prizes and social media hits. So they don't cost the company money per se, they're
Oh
free.
wow.
So the movement of those extras, I was on set the whole time because it is a massive endeavor to bring them in,
Mm-hmm.
put them in the auditorium. Danny's got 5 16 millimeter cameras on that because he wanted to shoot it in 16. And then when you break for lunch, to rotate them all out of that auditorium through the box lunch tables and back to the seats so they could eat in the seats. That was a sort of like a military undertaking. So in that movie, each of those venues, whether it was there or the Opera House or the Davies Symphony Hall, I was full on hands on with that because I had more prep and I could bring that into the actual production. I knew the buildings well, I knew the building site reps. So it was easier for me to come up with a plan with the knowledge I had. On a more contained film without numbers like that, I will generally allow the second or the additional second AD to process and set them, and I'm not that involved day to day. What I will do every movie, whether it's a huge one or not, is in prep. Bikeriders, just to go back to that one, I showed Jeff a lot of faces, and we world built this 1960s motorcycle club environment. So whatever the size of the movie, whether it's period or not, I work with the director in prep extensively as a courtesy. Some do, you pick them, they don't care. Some do. And until I know what his or her preference is, I will be in their face. This is the extra wife that doesn't speak until they, either shoo me away or we get a shorthand where he starts or she starts to trust me. So in
Mm-hmm.
that sense, I'm very involved. The setting on the bigger ones I am, but day to day on a more normalized movie, if you will, I don't do a lot of setting on the set because I go
Okay.
to and from. I can't set a ballroom scene and then have to dip out and call an actor, and then suddenly who's going to match
Mm.
the background, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah. 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 It makes sense that if you did have a second AD, they would be the person interacting with the extras in background,
Right.
while you are essentially the hub to coordinate everybody else. So that it definitely makes sense. Now, having been on mini sets, do you find there are certain qualities that lend themselves to a well run set?
I think if you have the fundamental core, I think that will mechanically move a set along is you have like, the director, the first AD, and the DP. They form like that triangle, and if the three of them are in sync, it will move as efficiently as humanly possible. That sort of triangle. And what I think establishes that relationship is a first AD that's a creative problem solver and also a listener. If you listen
Mm-hmm.
more than you speak, you're going to be able to take in a lot more input. So a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the first ADs that I enjoy working with are they're more soft spoken and they're very good at what they do and they drive the company. And it's only when they raise their voice that you realize something is someone is either doing something they shouldn't be on the set, or because they're steady state and they're more focused on working with the DP and the director to drive the ship, if that makes sense.
Okay. Definitely. Definitely. Now, do you have any stories of some sets that you really enjoyed being on?
I worked the first 2 movies I did with Clint Eastwood were war movies, and he works at a very brisk pace. So when we were recreating the Battle of Iwo Jima, even though I had these amphibious craft in the surf line that beach when the cameras are rolling, and then the doors open, and then the guys attack the beach. Because Clint works so fast, I was never able to get out of frame. You don't roll camera and then I run away. So I am in the surf line with my weapon and my helmet and my pack as one of the extras, as well as the 4 military advisors. So we broke the beach into fifths, and each one of us took a fifth so that we could lead our guys into the berm, and then they would start to dig and take cover from all the incoming artillery. So my favorite thing working with Clint is every movie I would be something else. And that one I was a Marine. When I did another one, Letters from Iwo Jima, I was filmed as a Marine as well. Another couple movies I would dress in like period clothes and be a protester so that I could start the protest when camera was rolling. I'm in the midst, and I could tap the drummer. And I'm like, when you guys hear the snare drum, everybody starts marching. So I'd hear it and then tap him, and then that would start. So not being able to get out of frame made it really exciting because it makes you don't have the luxury of 9 takes and you're sitting at the monitor watching your background. You do it from instinct. This is what I think the camera is going to see, and regardless of the playing field. So it made us really good at just trusting your own instinct. I was never going to see a monitor image on those movies. There's just no way. So I was an extra, and that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that, and I think all of the directors that I work with, I just enjoy being part of the storytelling process. It's really fulfilling when you finish a day's work or you finish the movie to know that what you've done is going to be, for some, life changing, or at least an escape for an hour and a half, 2 hours for someone. That's the thrill of it for me, is knowing that we're putting something out there that hopefully, stands the test of time.
Absolutely. Now, have you had any experiences on set that were, not the normal routine? Something unusual happens that might have uh, required some creative problem solving?
Yeah, we've had a lot of those. I mean, period vehicles break down that we've had to push into the shot because we were just out of frame, and they were pushing this Model T into the frame because it just needs to park in front of someone's house. Things like that. Or I'm trying to think. Yeah, I don't know that anything is like gotten to the point of where like, that was completely, flummoxed us or anything like that.
Or
You just
how about a scheduling conflict that might have required some creative problem solving?
Oh, I think we had a lot of those on Bikeriders as well, with getting the guys licensed. So we had a
Oh,
couple of situations where we had somebody that he had a permit, but he wasn't fully licensed yet, and we needed to do that before he could ride and be approved by the underwriter, the insurer. So we finished a scene, we put him on an airplane, we sent him back to Los Angeles. We had a stunt guy standing by with a trailer with a little 250cc motorcycle on it, picked him up, took him to the DMV, to a nearby parking lot. They rode around a bit, took him to the DMV, put him on that bike. He got his license. I got a great picture, like the end of the Breakfast Club with him doing that. And then got him on a plane, got him back to Cincinnati, and the next day he was able to ride in picture. So,
that's
that,
amazing. As
that
I
was
always
probably
love hearing those types of stories because it's inevitable that you're going to face something. Something always comes up, and hearing stories of people coming up to something like that and finding a way through it that gives me hope whenever I come up to something along those lines. So thank you for sharing that. Do you have any other happy accident stories you can tell us?
let me think. I think we had a couple on Steve Jobs where Danny Boyle, the director, he wanted the crowd really fired up. I mean, I don't know if it's a happy accident, but I think one of the my favorite moments on that was it was when we were doing the Macintosh product launch. I was out there we had gotten the whole room seated. We have 1,800 people in the Flint Auditorium, and the first AD and I are on the stage. He's doing his, kind of tried and true shtick to get everybody motivated and pumped up. And then he and I were like standing side by side, but we didn't realize that Danny had come out of the curtains behind us, and we were doing our shtick, and then the crowd just went berserk, and we're like, "What is happening?" I'm like, this is Don Murphy, Pete Dress. We're really nobody. And then I see Danny had come up over my shoulder, and everybody was, pumped because they knew who he was already, which was pretty great. That he's a great filmmaker. But Danny was able to capitalize on the energy. He got everybody pumped up, and then he stepped away, and we just rolled cameras when everybody was still,
That's
that
amazing.
palpable energy. So those venues are really good like that, because it's one thing to take 200 people and move them around the room so you could stitch it together and make 1,800. It's something else to have 1,800 physical bodies in the space. It's a dramatically different energy for the actors to play to,
Oh, I would
and
imagine. I would imagine. You go to a football stadium or even an auditorium, and just the energy there when you walk in is so much different. So I would imagine trying to wrangle that for a shot could be cumbersome.
yeah, and it's where these products were. Danny kept saying it was the dawn of the new machine age, and this is the place where it happened. So these people, it's very sort of in the Bay Area DNA already.
Hmm.
So these people were more than excited to participate in all of these, recreations of the product launches.
Definitely. Definitely. Well, Pete, do you have any general tips for someone that might be working on a set for their first time?
I think, for example, if you're a PA, and you're typically, you'll be in the assistant director department. We are one of the few departments where you can legally have a non-union member as part of your department. A lot of the other departments, they don't want to be, issuing jobs, if you will, to people that aren't in the
Hmm.
union. So it's a little more tightly controlled. So odds are, if you're on the set as a PA, you're going to be with the assistant directors. I would say come to work, listen, and always watch what's happening, because you'll see that no matter the size of the project, it's all scalable. It always works the same way. Actors come
Right.
in. If you have a director that rehearses, some don't. Then in that case, the stand-ins come in and they'll sort of block it, or maybe it's just two people at dinner and there's no blocking. It's always the same. Rehearse with the actors, or just go right into lighting with the second team. Actors come in, you roll, you change the camera position, you cut, change the camera position, etc., 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 and the day moves along. And it doesn't matter the size of it. So if you're listening and you're watching, you'll pick up the pattern fairly quickly. Even the way you do firearms or things like that, pyrotechnics, even those all follow the same set procedures. So my advice would be to come in and listen and watch, and just be present. Don't be on your phone. Now's not the time to be checking your socials. Do that at lunch, or on your way to the bathroom or something. But I think if you're there and you're present and you're listening and you're watching, you're gonna figure it out, because it's not. That's the trick, is that it doesn't really change that much. How directors direct will change, but how the process moves along with them doesn't really change. It's seamless in most instances.
Awesome. That was about as perfect of an answer as I can think of. Now, for someone specifically looking to become an AD, do you have any advice on how to get started?
That's a little trickier, because even we have sort of controls. We have sort of a gatekeeping system in place. There is a way by which you can obtain production assistant days, um, by keeping copies of your call sheets and your production reports and your pay stubs, and those days can be submitted to the New York, what's called the Contract Administration, DGACA, Directors Guild of America Contract Administration. So after you've obtained 600 days that you can account for on paper, I would submit more in case they throw some out.
Hmm.
You submit that to New York, and then they put you on what's called the commercial qualification list, which allows you to work on commercials in LA or on movies and TV outside of LA or New York. So you're now able to do that after 600 days, just not in those two major metropolitan areas. And then after you've accumulated uh, more days doing that, you can then work in LA and New York. That's one way to
Okay.
do it. It's a little more of a lengthy road. The other way to do it, and again, it's pretty small numbers of people that they accept, would be the trainee program. And then the website, I can send it to you guys if you want to put it on as part of this. You would submit now it's a series of essays where they ask you
Okay.
some questions about yourself and your leadership situations in which you've demonstrated leadership skills. And then they take those essay answers and then they do their smoke and mirrors and secrets, and they decide who the class is going to be. And after you uh, get in, if you do 400 days in LA or wherever, if you get on a show that travels, 400 days later, you're an AD in Southern California and New York. It's a much more
Oh, wow.
streamlined route. It's going to take you maybe 2.5, 3 years that way, as opposed to the other way. It could take substantially longer to accumulate production assistant days.
Okay. Well, excellent. Excellent. Well, Pete, I think you answered all of our questions and more. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today. All this information is so invaluable. It's going to help the next filmmakers on their way to being where you are. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
If you're looking for more deep dives into the StudioBinder software or filmmaker interviews, be sure to like and subscribe to be notified when new videos are added. I'm Brandon with StudioBinder Academy. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.